Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Hanging with Education. This is a weekly show where we explore different ways technology might be integrated into adult education or education at any level. If you're viewing the stream live and you would like to send a question or share something that you know, for instance, there is a prompt right now on the live screen asking that if you've used spreadsheets in education before, or if you know of some ways to use spreadsheets, it would be nice to hear what ideas people have. Tonight we're going to be working with spreadsheets, particularly Google Sheets, and I'm just going to be showing some ways that may not be traditionally used. You won't find these very often in textbooks or in formal trainings on how to use spreadsheets, because they get pretty geeky with all kinds of formulas and then charting. I'm going to look for some other uses teachers might use, particularly Google Sheets for, that teachers have found quite effective in their work. This is intended for people who might be aware of what a spreadsheet is but may not have played around with it a little bit. If you are a power user and everything else, by all means, you'll probably want to fast forward through a few bits. But there are some examples in here that I think even the seasoned spreadsheet person will say, wow, oh, okay, that's cool. I want to try that on my own and let's see if I can recreate that. So there is a little candy there for those of you more experienced as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to encourage you to log into Google if you have a Google account and use the little dashboard to get to your Google Drive. And the little dashboard, by that I mean that little series of 9 boxes in an array. You can get to your Google Drive. And then when you click on New, we're going to be working with the green icon, Google Sheets. And I've already created one, and I just called it Demo Hanging with Education. I have my screen jacked up to 150%, so most of you probably will not have it at that unless you need that jacked up for vision issues. So I may have to reduce the font size on my screen at times to see some of the functions. For instance, when I right-click on things, you'll notice that my menu that appears on the screen here is not complete. I have to scroll down every once in a while to see it. Not all the menus will scroll down like that, and I may have to change my resolution. So I do apologize for any of those changes. I have on the bottom a bunch of tabs, and right now they're all blank. Don't worry about having all those tabs set up to begin. But I do want to start with just a simple idea of setting up a quiz, and I know we briefly touched on this last session last week, but I just want to make sure that, if you haven't watched last week's, you have an opportunity to still see how do we do this. I'm in a spreadsheet, but Google has a bunch of things that can integrate with the spreadsheet. Specifically, there is a form editor that you can attach right to this spreadsheet. So under Tools, you can create a form. Now it's very interesting. Once you create a form, there will later be a new menu item up here called Forms. And there will be a menu that's added just specifically for forms as they relate to the spreadsheet. So that's kind of neat that they do that. So I'm going to create a form right now. It's going to open a new tab. And it'll have the questions over here, the title of it, and you can describe this quiz if you wish. If you had instructions for students, you'd put them in here. And then you have questions. When you're designing forms for any kind of quiz or sheet, I want to remind you to remember to ask the students for their name, because it's amazing. Teachers get so excited about, oh, I'm making a form, let me make up my questions and everything else. They forget to even ask the student for their name. And that gets a little complicated when you're trying to assess that quiz and get that information back to a student. Now, I do have an area here that says short answer text. That's a choice over here that you can choose from a drop-down. And when I say drop down, by the way, if you're not familiar with it, there's a little triangle that's upside down. That's what I'm referring to when I say a drop down. When you click on that, there's a bunch of different choices here of different types of questions. And for today, we'll just play, with a few different ones. We don't want to play with a whole lot of these because a lot of them, they're pretty self-explanatory. There are a few that are different. I need to require their name, so I'm going to click this little button down here that says require. And notice how the name of my question is only a single word. If you had more verbose instructions, I would encourage you not to put in a long name here. So you wouldn't put in an actual question. Let's say you had a question, if a pigeon flies south at 300 miles an hour and gets hit by a tornado, then, if you don't want to write that whole question out here, and the reason you don't want to do that is this particular line is going to be the heading of your spreadsheet. So when this form is done and I come back in here, right up here in cell A1, I'm going to see the word name. Well, actually, they've already started making it. So here's a timestamp, which is automatic. But you can see name is right here. Where if I said name all 50 states that you have been to. Now, if I give Google a few seconds to catch up to that, we can look back in the spreadsheet, and you can see how this is very unwieldy for a title header of a spreadsheet. This is not something you really would want. So there is a way to get around that, and it's not very intuitive when you first look at this interface. I'm just going to get this back down to name. Down in the lower left-hand corner, this is Google's way of saying, hey, there's more options. So if you ever see 3 vertical lines, you may see it in Google Chrome. There's 3 vertical lines up here. That is a whole bunch of settings you can change. In this case, I'm going to put in a description line, and that comes underneath the name. And I might put in, please share your first name. And I might provide an example just so they know what is expected. Now, obviously with name, I don't need to put that in, but I'm just sharing this with the idea of, writing out a full question. We'll see that in a minute. With this one created, I have 2 options right now. I could just hit this duplicate and it'll make another one, and all I have to do is change the title of it, maybe change the type, and then I can change, everything's all set up here. Or if I want, I can click this plus button. Now, because of the resolution of my screen, my buttons appear on the bottom. If you have the resolution much more smaller size, it probably shows up on the right-hand side of your form. So I'll hit add a question, and I'll just type it in. And let's just assume this was a simple math question. What is, oh, sorry, I don't want to write out the whole question here. See, I almost fell for that. I'm going to put just number 1 here, so I know which question this is. And then I'm going to come to this option where I can choose description. And I'm going to say, what is the square root of 25? And again, if you're not mathematically inclined, don't worry about not knowing what the square root of 25 is. I'll give you some insight. It's 5. I want this to be a multiple choice question. So for each option, I could put down 25. I'm going to put 12.5. That's a common error students might make. I might say it's positive 5. I might say it's negative 5. Or I might say it can be positive 5 or negative 5. Which, from a mathematical standpoint, that is the more accurate answer. And I don't like questions that have gray areas like this, because when students are lazy and they're just reading through a question, they're going to see +5. They're going to say, oh yeah, that's it. And they're not going to realize, well, it could be negative 5 as well. Well, if it could be both, what should I do? And students who are very poor at reading questions may miss that, this option down here that says both 5 and negative 5 may exist. So this is not an exemplary question, but I am putting it in because I want to show a few things we can do with the solutions on this. I'm going to make this required. I want the student to answer this because this is not an exploratory thing. It's not like a diagnostic. If it's diagnostic and they don't know, I would actually add another option in here saying, I don't know this yet. And give them the option, because any monkey can sit there and slam on a keyboard and actually guess some right at times. So if you're creating a diagnostic quiz, make sure you have an I don't know option. Too many diagnostics do not allow that as an option. And I think that's a huge disservice to the students when we're trying to find out where they're at. Another question. We might say, describe absolute. I'm just going to put the word describe for now. I'll write out the whole question here. Whoops, I missed it. And I'm going to say describe what the absolute value of negative 25 means by giving a real life example. So this is a question that may require a little bit more than just checking a button. So in this case, I'd choose a paragraph. You have two options for text: short answer and paragraph. Short answer would be like a word or a sentence. Paragraph gives much more characters. I think it's 256 characters or more. So that's a better choice for this option, just because I want to give students enough space here. And I'm going to make that required as well. So my quiz here is just going to be simple. And again, this is a little bit of a review from what we've had before. Now, when you go to share this with students, I'll remind you that we are in the form editor, and you can see up, I don't know if you can see with my text right now, so small, but in my address bar, it ends with the word edit, because this address is actually to the editor that references this form. If I want to go to the actual form, again over here where it says more, I can click on that and I can go preview. Preview shows me the actual form. It says view form at the end of the address. This is the address that I would share on my website, or I would put a QR code or something like that so students can get to this quiz. And they would come through and they would answer the quiz. Now, I would encourage you right now, if you're at this point where you can preview, go ahead and answer it. So my name, I'm just going to put the word answer key, because I want to make sure I have the right answers in there to begin with, and that's going to help us with correction as we go through. Now, the description one, that's really hard. You know, we don't really have, people aren't going to be able to match word for word everything you put in here. So what I typically do is I write in here some key points that I want to make sure students include. So as an answer key note to myself, I might put down something like, they might mention distance, no matter which direction. They might give an example of how many degrees above or below 0. You know, so they might use temperatures. They might use, well, actually, if they're using absolute values, they're just measuring how many degrees away from 0 they are. They don't care if it's positive or negative. That would just be like if they had to warm something up or if they had to cool something off. They just want to keep track of how many degrees they're warming or cooling. So that might be an example. Distances are another example. You know, there's a few other examples they might include. So I'd write some notes in here as to what kind of things I'm looking for in the student's response, and I would hit submit. Now, all of this was just simply to have a place for students to put responses in. Now think of this in terms of how we might correct this. I have found great value with these text answers. I'm going to turn the word wrap on this. So text wrapping. If you're not familiar with that, I'm clicking on the entire column. Let me click off of more here. I click on the D to select the entire column, and I'm going to click under more because my screen is so large. And I'm choosing this icon over here that stands for text wrapping, and I'm going to turn that on. And what that does is it makes it a little easier for it to read on the screen. When I show these solutions or guesses that students have put in without people's names, that's great. So the question is, how do you hide these so you have these conversations, assuming I can put this up on a screen? You can highlight all of these columns. I'm highlighting A, B, and C right up here where the letters are, and open up one of the menus on any of these and just say hide. So that's going to hide those columns. So immediately all the students see are the things I wanted to describe. And I might scroll that down a little bit so that my answer key of key points I wanted to hear from students, I may scroll that down. Now students have no idea whose are whose. They'll probably recognize their own, I'd hope. But now we can have a discussion about what does the class understand about absolute value. So a lot of teachers fret over, oh man, correcting essay type questions is so difficult. Well, if you turn it into a discussion piece, and this is like a quick stop check, once you get used to setting up these quizzes, they're very, very quick. I've set them up in class in like a minute. You know, while students are pulling out some homework or something, I'll set up the quiz and boom. You know, could everybody go to the class website, click on this link, and take this quick quiz real quick before we even start on the homework. Just want to see what you guys remember from last class. And boom, we have a discussion piece right here. This eliminates students feeling like, oh, I'm the only one in the class who's clueless. Everyone else has an understanding of what's going on. No, they get to see right here what the whole class thinks about a particular topic. And I have found a lot of students sharing how refreshing it is to see the thoughts of others. And it's a safe way because they don't know who said what. And I never call out, okay, who put the response on number 5? What the heck were you talking about? I don't do that because obviously you're going to traumatize people and make them feel unsafe. So be careful about how you ask about these questions. Instead, it might be safer to say, what do we think somebody might have meant by this statement? What do people normally mean when they say things like that? You know, questions that get to what the intent might have been or what the thought process might have been, and how could you have corrected that to a more correct version of what we're looking for in this problem. So again, I wanted to show this because people are pretty familiar with ABCD questions, but the essay questions, they have a hard time using them. I found using these sheets in an interactive way with the forms very helpful. Another thing I have to do frequently is work with worksheets or forms from either other agencies or maybe their assessments. And here's one, for instance. This is the main learner intake form. It's stuff that we have to collect for main stars, which is the NRS reporting, data reporting things. It's 6 pages, and doing it out on paper, then having to type it all up on computer. Anyone who has worked with adult learners knows that handwriting can sometimes be quite a bear to read. And if you can't see that, by the way, it's not important to read all the text. What I'm more concerned about is the formatting here. I want to duplicate this form digitally in a way that students could just type in their answers and I can see what's going on. Now that's a little different from what we just did. What we just did in this quiz example, I'm going to go ahead and pull up those invisible sheets. And I'm going to do that. I'm looking at things right now zoomed up and it's kind of throwing me off a little. It should be under view, hidden sheets. Oh, it's not a hidden sheet. I'm sorry, it's hidden columns. See this little triangle up here in the left-hand side of the D column here? That little triangle lets me unhide those columns. Under View, I can view the hidden sheets if there's some sheets I wanted to hide. We'll talk about why we might want to do that a little later. So in this quiz, I would have a different timestamp and name for every single student. So if I had 12 students taking this quiz, all 12 of these rows would have an individual student's work. Great if we're having a discussion about all of their work. Not so great if I had to evaluate all their responses and get them back individual feedback. So that doesn't work so well. That works it's even more complicated when I have a worksheet like the one that's on the screen right now. I do realize that I forgot to change the screen over. So those of you who are wondering what triangle is he talking about, he doesn't have that up. I do apologize. I was talking about, let me duplicate that. I had this on the screen and I was trying to bring up the hidden columns. It's this little triangle up in the top left hand corner of the D column here. I just click on that and I get to see all the other columns. So I do apologize for confusion. People were looking at the screen going, what's he looking at? So when I'm doing a worksheet, I can't really use this form entry thing, especially to get it to look like a form, like I want it to. So let's just start with creating the worksheet. I'm going to go to a new tab, and if you've never used Google Sheets before, this little plus button in the bottom left-hand corner lets you add a new sheet. And I'm going to highlight the letters all the way across. So I'm just highlighting A through, I don't know, what does it go to, Z? And I'm going to go between two of the letters. You notice my cursor changes from a hand to a double-headed arrow. So again, I've highlighted all the letters on the top, all the column headers, and I'm going to move between two of them to get this double-headed arrow, and I'm just going to click on that and drag it so that I can get something that looks visually like a square. May not be perfect, but that's okay. These squares give us very much a layout grid that they might use in drafting before computers were really involved. They would have graph paper that would have little 16th inch grid on it, or maybe an 1/8 inch grid, and people would do their layouts and drawings on that graph paper. I'm going to give you a heads up in Google Sheets for the stuff we're about to do. It's important to have the first column, that's the A column, have a little gap there, just a little space, and the first row will be like a little space. And the reason for this, let me just share with you an example. I'm going to highlight this range and assume that I want to make a box around it. And we'll go over how I'm doing that in a minute. Notice how all four sides of this box are visible. If I undo all my actions here a little bit and get back to the regular size, and I'm going to now highlight on that first row, B through F, and I'm going to put that box again. Watch what happens. This is a little frustrating for people when they first start working with Sheets. Notice how I don't see the top line? I don't see it because Google Sheets is saying, look, don't worry about that. We know it's at the edge of the paper and everything else. That's very disconcerting for people, that they don't see that top line, and it bothers a lot of teachers that I've worked with. So I always encourage people, give yourself a row and a column buffer on all sides. So again, I'm just going between the A and the B, making that small, going between the 1 and the 2, making that smaller. Maybe the Z column over on the end, I might end up using the Z column as a spacer. Maybe I'll have to add more columns, so I'll wait for that later. And likewise, a row on the bottom. By default, they give you, I think, 1,000 rows, so you probably don't have to set that until you've done your work. Now, I want to flip back real quickly to look at my screen and see, what do I need? Okay, I need a space for a graphic. I need, what else is here? I got the space for the graphic. I've got a big title. I've got an updated on. So I start thinking about the fact that there might be multiple rows here. Maybe this main adult education learner intake title takes up 1 or 2 rows, or at least one big fat row. and I start thinking about how that could be parsed out in my little grid. Having a printout of your form with you is very helpful in this process. So I'm going to jump right back into my browser, and I'm going to set up an area for that graphic. I'm just going to highlight an area for now. It doesn't matter that it's exact to that. And I'm going to click up here. You might have it on your toolbar. You don't have to hit more if you can see it already. But this merge cells merges both horizontally and vertically by default. There is a little drop-down triangle here that allows you to merge only horizontally or only vertically. If I merged it only horizontally, let's see what that looks like. That just basically said each row is going to be that wide. Well, that's not what I intended. I intended to have everything inside this box merged together to make one big box. So now that one big box, I can insert a graphic. So I can go Insert, and on the bottom down here, it's hard to see because of my resolution, but there is Image. And I would pull up an image from someplace. So let's choose an image to upload. I'll just grab something off of my drive. There we go. We'll get a nice smiley pic. So instead of a state logo, my worksheet has my face on it. And I can resize that a little bit and put that centered where I want it. And on a worksheet, they maybe had that in a box. They may have had a border around it. So next to the merge cells is the borders. And again, I'm going to click on the little triangle next to borders, and there are many options. I want something that surrounds that whole area, the outside only. Many people accidentally click all borders, and what that does is it highlights all the interior parts as well. So I'm just going to hit the outer border. I could even change the color. Maybe I wanted that to be a bright red, and I wanted it to be a dotted line. So when I click off of this, you can see it's red, it's dotted, and there's my picture. So in this way, I can start duplicating the images that appear in some of the forms I want to recreate. And it also adds a little color and spice to some worksheets. You could put charts that you've made, graphs that you've made. Those can all go into your worksheets pretty easily this way. Now I noticed on the form, let me jump back over to that. On the form, I had updated on up here in this top right hand corner. And then it said Main Adult Education Learner Intake Form. So not really concentrating on the different names. Those are things I need to format. I need a big text covering all this area, and then a little note up here for when it was updated. And then down here, I'm going to need something in blue and some text inside of it. So let's jump back to the other example to see how we might play around with that a little bit. I'm going to go back to my browser, and I'm going to figure that top area, again, you have to eyeball it a little bit and check on your font size. I'm going to say updated on, and I'm just going to leave it that way. I see that, okay, I put this way far to the left. I've got plenty of room over here on the right-hand side of my paper. So I'm going to move that over a little bit. And I'm going to do that by clicking right here in the Q2 area. Because if I click over here in R2, for instance, notice there's nothing here in my formula bar. For those of you not familiar with spreadsheets, again, remember that what you see on the screen is not what's in the square. What's in that individual cell is actually what you see up here in the formula bar. So right now, R2 has nothing in it. Even though if I click off of it, it looks like it has ATED from the word updated on it. But the reality is the Q2 has updated on the entire phrase, and since it can't fit in the Q cell, it just overlaps into the other ones. I'm going to cut that, and I'm doing that by doing a Control X on my keyboard. And I'm going to do a Control V to paste it over here. That looks like a more appropriate space for where I want it. So anything you put in here, you can move around. Now, I mentioned that only this S2 now has content. I want to make sure that that whole thing is merged. And sometimes you have to merge it so that there's a little bit extra space. It's okay to hit merge again to give you that extra space. And now I want an underline or a blank so I can put the date in here. I might highlight the cells. I'll hit merge. And this time under borders, I'll just hit the bottom border. That gives the illusion of having, oops, I forgot to change the border type here. So I will change that border type to black, and I'll change the fill type to solid on that cell when I have that highlighted. And I have to take that off. Now this is another thing. When you've set a border, it may not change the border. You may have to take it off and put a new one on. This clear all borders is what I use to erase a border. And then I'm going to click on the bottom border again just to reestablish it. So it erased that red dotted line that was there and now put an underline here. This gives the illusion of hitting, the underscore character in a word processor. And it's really nice and easy because you don't have to sit there wailing on the word processor space button or underscore character. Now I notice there's a big space between updated on, that colon, and the underline. So I could come over in this cell and change the alignment to right aligned. And that immediately lines it up. So I'm using a grid system. I'm using the tools of alignment. I can change the vertical alignment in bigger cells. I'm using the borders. I'm using the merging. All these buttons that people may look at a spreadsheet and say, what are those for? Well, a lot of them are for designing sheets and forms the way you want them to. Now remember, I had a big text area here that I wanted. I'm just going to highlight this whole area here, and I'm just going to merge that all together to give me my big text. And I'm going to go to the vertical alignment. I want this centered. That's the alignment up and down. And I also want it horizontally centered. So there's two different centering tools once you have something merged. And I'm just going to put in here, I'm going to click on more to turn that off. This is my big title that I needed for my worksheet. Now that doesn't look terribly big, does it? It did center, but it's not very big. This is something that people who are new to cloud computing may really want to pay attention to. I can click in here, and I have the cell highlighted right now. I can see that up in my formula sheet. I can see I have the text up there. I can click on the font size and change the font size to size 14. I can change the type to say Comic Sans. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have it all highlighted. Comic Sans 14, I was saying. And that gets me something that's kind of nice. But that may be different for everybody's system. Everybody's browser, depending on, not everybody's going to be using Chrome. Not everybody will be using whatever browser you're using when you set this up. So it'd be nice if this text can change to a font that's appropriate for whatever people are using. So I'm going to go back to what I was here. And instead of changing font sizes, which you're welcome to do, you can also do, oops, I have to double click on it. You can also click on the cell and, wait, where is it? I was going to look for the formatting where you can change it to header 1, header 2, header 3, but I don't see that they have that there anymore. Well, I guess we are reduced to just using the font sizes, but they did have formatting, and maybe, no, it's just not there anymore. It was under format. I know you can do that in Google Docs, but I'm sorry that's not here. So let's make that a little larger. 14, bold, and maybe it was a different font. And down below there was another section that had that blue highlight, if you remember what I had. I'm going to highlight 3 areas here and change them all to that blue highlight. And I'm doing that by highlighting the 3 areas and going to the fill color. And I'll just choose a nice light blue that works, that looks kind of like a green. So I don't like that too much. And the reason I chose 3 was because, remember I said we need a little bit of a border when we're doing underlines and the borders. Like up here when we did updated on, there was, that's technically a border, even though it's an underline. And there's some issues sometimes with that not showing up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to squish up my column 8, my row 8 rather, and I'm going to squish up my row 10. Those are just kind of a buffer zone on top and below for some of the underlines, because if you'll remember right, on my form I've got a box actually around this whole blue heading, and I want to make sure that box shows up. So that's why I added that little padding. This is something that's not intuitive. It's not something that people normally would think of doing or needing to do. But I found that working with Google Docs, there's that little quirkiness where you really need to know these little tricks to have things come out the way you want, especially when you go to print them. So now I've added that border by highlighting the whole area, and you'll notice that I did click on the little drop-down menu, and I chose the outer border, so I didn't have the inside set up as a grid. Now I'm highlighting the inside part of this. I don't need a border on that, but I do need to merge it so I can now start typing. So, oh, you know what? This part, I'm going to undo that because this part had 3 different sections. If I look back at my example again, I had all registrations over here. I had student information, and then I had like an asterisk with is a required field. They even use different font types on this worksheet. Very nice of them to give me a challenge. I love that. So over here, I might have just this first area, and I'm just going to merge that and say, you know, here's my first area. And then over here, I might go somewhere in the middle. And this was the larger one they had. So maybe I'll change the font size here to like 12 or 14 and say this is the bigger stuff. And then there was a little comment over on the other side and saying asterisk stuff was here. And we can type that all out. Now I did out all 6 of these sheets, and you know, today we're going through instructionally how to do all these things. Once you get proficient with these little quirks of adding the little paddings, of how these tools for formatting are used, once you get familiar with these, I can do an entire worksheet in maybe 5-10 minutes, depending on how complex the worksheet gets. It really does go very quickly once you get the hang of it. So I did want to share that, doing a worksheet. Now by extension, there are, I do want to share one more thing on the worksheet idea. If you do worksheets with students, remember that each student needs their own copy of the worksheet. There are many different ways to do this. I find the easiest way to do this is I would save this, instead of demo hanging with education, I would have just that one worksheet. You know, instead of having all the tabs I just have that one worksheet tab. And I might come up here, instead of demo with education, I might call it Worksheet Master for this form. And then I would go to File, and I would say Make a Copy. And I would make a copy of this for each of my students. Now that is a little bit of a drag, but if you're using Google Documents with your students already and you have folders set up with them already, it's very nice to be able to say, I want this to be sample student. That's the person's name, sample student, and this is going to be their intake form. Because that's what I was building here, was their intake form. Before I hit return or anything else, I'm going to go down here in the folder and I'm going to change which folder it was in. Now in my Hanging with Education, let me go back, Hanging with Education, I had student files. So under my student files, I can go in there, oh, there's sample student. So I'm going to choose to put this in my student folder, so my sample student has this intake form already. So it is a little bit of a drag to make an individual copy for each student. But if you're already working with the folders and you've created shared folders already, it's very efficient, because once you've put that worksheet in there, it's all ready for the student to use when they come in. They just go to their folder digitally, and there's their worksheet right there ready to go. And they can enter this. And I can already see up top, this is the sample student intake form, and it is not my original template one that I was building. So just keep that in mind. Now, if you do have a lot of students and you want to share this worksheet with a lot of students, I would share with you that there is a better way to do this, and it's using the Google Drive system. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this. There's an online Google Drive, and then there's an offline Google Drive, and I wish Google was a little bit more transparent with it. I mean, a little bit more clear with the names. When I go to any of my Google logins and I click this little navigation panel and I click on Drive, I'm going to the cloud version of this. If I download the Google Drive app on my computer, what happens is all of the documents that I have in my drive, now I have tons of documents in my drive, all these folders, all these documents, all of these documents would go onto my hard drive, so that if I'm offline, I can still work on my documents. And then the next time I'm online, it will upload automatically. Nice feature, but one thing you have to be careful of. If you're working on a computer that other people have access to, they could go to the downloaded Google Drive app and automatically access all your files that are there and modify them, which is kind of a security issue. Now, you can set it up so that you're the only one who has access to some of these files, and there are some safety precautions you can make against that. But I would just caution people, don't use Google Drive, the app, which downloads it to your hard drive, unless you're using your own computer that you know no one else is going to have access to. I would never do it in a computer lab, especially if you use Google Drive for anything non-education related. Because then everybody else will have access to it by just going to that place. The reason I mentioned the Google Drive app is because when you have that downloaded, and I don't have it downloaded on my computer right now because I prefer just to make each individual student. I don't have a caseload that has 120 students. And I don't know in adult ed anybody has classes that big, although intake people may have that many people they process in a chunk of time. You can go to your Google Drive, download, and highlight a bunch of files and just say duplicate and then put them into a folder very quickly and easily. It's a very fast system. It's just like the old DOS window tree where you just copy some files and you say make a duplicate and drag them into a folder. So I apologize I can't demo that for you right now. I don't have Google Drive installed. And that's my choice. So I'm going to get rid of my sample student here. I just wanted to share the difference between doing a worksheet and doing that form response thing where there's a form connected. Form response can have all the responses in one place, but it's a little harder to have students get back to it. I have students who may have to answer a 25-question form. They may only get 10 questions done. Well, using the form, you really can't have them go back and save their work and come back to it. Whereas if it was a worksheet, they can always just come back to the worksheet and continue filling in where they left off. So keep that in mind. There's advantages to both. Both can be used at different times for different purposes. Likewise, a poster. People don't think of sheets being used for posters, and I wouldn't stress that this is the ideal form of making a poster within the Google Suite, but it is a possibility, and I have used Google Sheets to make posters occasionally. Especially when I want interactive charts to be included in my poster. So my poster might be something I post on a class website where we have the class pictures from the class and then a graph of how we're doing in the corner that automatically updates based on data that's entered every week. Something like that, I would want a poster. And the concept here is the same as what we did earlier. You zone off, or lay out, if you will, the different zones you want and just merge those cells. And to start, you may want to put a border around it. And I see Mr. Lazaro has a question. Can you elaborate on that question, please, on your chat? I can see the chat question, but I'm not sure I understand your question. I could also come over and make different size boxes. And I didn't put a border around it. I'm putting borders around it so we can easily see where the boxes are. And maybe I want some text over here, so I'll just highlight an area and I'll merge those cells. And again, I'm putting borders around it so we can simply see where they are. And I'll just type my text. This is some text. And over here I want an image. You saw earlier how I did that. I just went to insert image. I could also insert a chart that we may have made. Let's put that one in there. And maybe up here. Oh, actually, that one should probably go over here. Let's put that over here. And then over here I might want to go with something larger. I know, I've got some students who are just playing with some slime. And I'll put that as a picture in there. That's kind of cool. All right, there they are. And they had some fun. Now, you notice here that the size has to be resized sometimes to fit in the cell you want. So you may have to do that occasionally as well. When I go to view, I can turn the grid lines off, and now I don't see all the grids. After I'm done with everything, this looks really slick because I don't have to worry about where everything lines up, but there are boxes there. I can highlight everything in the sheet and turn the background color to some offset color that I'd like. And I can now get rid of these borders because I don't need them. I was just using them to illustrate where the boxes were. And you can see that as we get rid of all the guides we were using to make this poster layout, we can see that we can have things floating around in different locations, and you can get really creative in how you design a poster in a sheet. One of the other features of Google Sheets is that there are a number of formulas. Now when I go to insert and I choose function, they give me a few of the common ones, but there's a more option. And that more option brings me to a screen with a number of functions. This list of functions, by the way, changes pretty frequently. And it's been impressive to me to see how many changes they make a year at this stuff. One of the things I found interesting, when we're trying to teach financial literacy, there are a number of formulas and stuff that banks use, especially with loans. And if you're looking through this screen at all right now, you'll see there are many different financial formulas already put in. So if you're talking about the principal equals rate times time formula, or compounded interest, or any of these values, there's formulas in here already. Now, if you want to get into like investments and that kind of information, there's even more power here to do stuff that, like, wow, I can actually get stock quotes automatically from Google, updated to the minute every time I load up this spreadsheet. So this list of formulas, I don't have the time today to go into all of these, but I did want to introduce that concept of the number of interactive formulas with Google, because Google is a search engine, that interactively update every time you look at your sheet. There's a huge amount of these. And I think one of them is called, I'm looking for it right now. No, it's not there. Let's see if I can find it. Stock price. No, it wasn't stock prices. I'll have to look up the price, and maybe we could do that again another week. But that formula, there's some formulas in here that I've done to create some investment scenarios where students get some money. I say, all right, pick some stocks that you think would go well. Why don't you write up a write-up for me sharing your strategy? Why do you think that's going to work well? And then they automatically can track that from week to week, and they can get the differences and everything else figured out by Google without doing a whole lot of the time crunching into formulas and such. I do want to share, let me get rid of these forms because I don't need those anymore. I used to go to this portal of apps that was made, MISTM, I think it's Maine Institute of Science and Teaching Math, I think. It was a grant funded that went out and cruised around the internet for interactive apps that people thought were really good in mathematics instruction. The problem was some of them, like mixing paint, was an awesome application for teaching the concept of how fractions, percents, decimals, and ratios are all related. They're all the same value. They're just different expressions of that value. It was great to start off any talk of those topics with this app. But you'll notice when I click on it, it was built with a technology that many browsers are abandoning now. And since this was designed, this app, many of these apps were designed by universities under grant or researchers under grant. Nobody's taken the time to go back and rebuild these. So I did want to share with those of you who are a little bit more proficient with spreadsheets that you can go to some of your best apps that you've seen online and have students or learners recreate those apps in a spreadsheet. So this mixed paint one, let me share that with you. I'm going to minimize my my font size just a little bit here because it's hard to see the whole screen. But the idea is I have blue cans, and there's blue cans I can choose. There's a little triangle in the corner, and there's a bunch of numbers in here, and I can choose up to 16 cans. Let me just choose 3 of them right now. And the white cans, I can choose, I don't know, let's go with 6 of them. So if I wanted to, I can hide all of the rows below this. Remember how we hid columns before? So I can hide, right now you can see all these things, but I'm going to just hide them. So I'm just going to highlight those rows and hide them. And you can see that I have the number 3 here and the number 6. And I might start asking students about how do you measure how blue something is? You know, what do you use for a scale? What do you use for values? How do you count how blue something is? And that's a great discussion, and they come up with some pretty ingenious ways to count things. And I might ask them, if I had 3 blue cans and 6 white cans, how does that differ in terms of blueness if I had 5 blue cans and 7 white cans? So they might think about that. And I ask them to make some conjectures. They compare notes with each other. And when they're done with their conjectures, I'll pop this open and we'll take a look at what we can see. We immediately see there's 5 blue cans here and 7 white cans and a total number of cans of 12. But notice how they can also see the fraction, the percent, the decimal, and the ratio. And even in English, for every 5 blue cans, there are 7 white cans. So I'm getting a written description of the ratio, and they can see a graph. They see every representation of how these cans are related to each other with all the different measures that we spend segmented chunks of time teaching. And that, to me, is a huge loss because some of our students are visual, and this graph is going to instantly help them understand what we're talking about. Whereas this 0.42, they're like, what? Where did the 42 come from? Why is there a point in there? What's going on? And they don't get me going on this 5:7. I thought we used colons in English. What's going on with this? You know, so it's very nice to see it in English. Oh, we're just saying for every 5 blue cans, there's 7 white cans. For students who are much more fluid with text, that would be something they gravitate to. And then they'll start talking to students who are more fluent with the fractions or the percents or whatever they gravitate to. I've tried this with teachers before, and it's interesting to see what each one gravitates to. And David is asking if we have time, can we create a graph from a Google Sheet? We definitely can. We just have a few more minutes left, and I'll do that in a second. I made this application a little bit more interactive. Let's just change this so you can see how it changes. 3 and 6 was the other one we had for an example. And you can see how the cans change automatically, the fractions change, the graph changes. They can see by the graph it looks very similar to the other one, but they can see by the percentages how it's like 10% different between those two examples, and they can see the ratios are different. But on the bottom I have a set of instructions in a different tab, and these set of instructions are kind of a teaching tool. How can teachers use this? And I have some questions that you might ask as prompts for students to explore with this tool that whole concepts of ratios, fractions, decimals, percents, and how they're related. I also have a link that automatically allows you to submit additional questions to the field. So if I click on this link, this is for teachers who say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we asked students this question? And they would type in the question, and as soon as they hit submit, that new question gets added to this list. And of course I can edit the list, so if anything inappropriate ever gets added, I can just delete it. But this now makes this a tool that all teachers can use. And I'll put a link to this Mixing Paint on my Hanging with Education site at the end. But right now let's attend to David's request for a graph. For graphing, it's very important that you have columns that represent the different parts of a graph. And this gets into the whole graphing idea. So maybe I have the number of hours I'm graphing something, and each hour I'm trying to measure how many customers come in. And for the hours, I'm just going to put down times. So let's say 6 a.m. And I'm going to come down here and just say equals the previous section plus 1. You don't have to know about formulas and stuff. Just know that I'm doing something lazy and cheap. I'm telling the computer, go to the previous cell in A2 and add 1 to it. So I'm going to have the computer count for me, so I don't have to sit there and type 1 through 12. And because I had to take the time to explain it to you, I could have just typed it almost as quickly. But when you're in a workflow, it can go pretty quick here. And again, I'll just put a 1 in here, and I'll say equal the previous one plus 1. So previous cell plus 1. And then I can just click on that blue box and drag that down and automatically increment each time. So let's have this open till 10 o'clock. So I go from 6 to 10 o'clock. I want to know how many customers. So I'm just going to randomly throw some numbers in here. 12 people, 2, 1. And then I get 16, 18, 20. All right, so I get some different numbers in here. I'm not going to go with the whole day just because of the time constraint here. But notice how I have this set up. I have headers on top describing my different values. I have something that's pretty consistent that I can measure and I have control over. And then I have some values that I'm recording at each point in time. So at hour 6, I found out how many. At hour 7, I found out how many. So this is my independent values, and you can teach the math terms here. I have control over this. This is something that's going to consistently go up by a set interval. And then I don't have any control over this. This is totally dependent. They call these dependent values on what happened during that hour or how many data points came in. So I'm going to highlight the headers, which describe my independent and dependent values, and then I'm going to highlight all my data. If it's arranged like this, I can click on this little insert chart icon. Alternatively, I can go under insert and choose chart as well. Both of them get me to the same screen. And I have a number of options. Just this choice of which graph is best for this type of data can lead to some very rich discussions. You can see over here it's got a bar graph with both hours and customers selected. I don't really want that. That's not something helpful for me. Well, what about a pie graph? Well, I don't know what all these little circles are for. Why am I doing it this way? This is not very helpful either. I could look at the hours and like, oh, this looks useful. But then when you hover over it and you actually see what it's recording the hours I was open. There's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This is just the number of hours I was open. This is kind of a silly graph. So just getting students to choose the correct graph from these options, it turns out the computer recommendations were horrible. So instead I'm going to click over here on chart types, and I'm going to choose one that I say, all right, maybe this is a little better. I'm going to choose a graph like this. And notice how it's graphing hours and customers. That's not what I really wanted. So I might have to choose switch rows with columns. No, that's not what I want. I want use column A as labels. So I had to choose column A as my labels. And that shows me my customers. Oh, I wanted to switch that. I'm sorry. Customers for each hour. There we go. I wanted to aggregate column A. So they may have to change and toggle these different switches to get the graph so that it has their information on the bottom that they wanted and their information on the left. Now I want my independent values on the bottom. I want my hours down here. So I do need to switch so my hours are on the different area. Now see, the customers isn't going down there. Hours should be coming down here. Customers should be going up there. Oh, I see. Use row 1 as headers. That's what we should have. So this isn't going in the right format, and it's probably because of the chart type I chose. Let me come over here to a column, and I want to, the hours is on the wrong. There's the customers, but I want the hours to be independent. And I'm not getting that the way I want that. So you will have to play with the settings on this. That's close, but that's not what I wanted. Under customization, you can choose the axes. You can choose the horizontal axis and the formats for all that stuff, and the title and the labels and the colors and all that other stuff. And you can even have the items slanted if they don't fit in. And under the series, you can change the color of that. So if you didn't want it blue, you can change that green. So you can change those different values. But I do want to go back to this chart type here. And I want to cancel this for a second and verify. I have my headers. I have my independents. That is all set up correctly. Go to chart type. I'm going to choose a simple bar graph. Okay, hours and customers. It doesn't have anything labeled, and it has both there. I don't want both there. I don't want I do want customers. So I want the row 1 to be used as the headers, and I'm clicking on that, and it's coming up correctly, but the graph isn't doing what I wanted it to do. Those are customers in total, but I'd like to have, oh no, that's it right there. Those are the hours, but now I need the labels on that. So does that show up the labels if I click on that? It does not show up the labels on that. That switches them, which I don't want. So these are the hours, hour 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And these are the number of people that did show up. So I do have the axes set up correctly on that, which I don't understand why that wasn't doing it before, because I had that exact same setting. It might have been something I had highlighted, so I do apologize for that not coming out right the first way. David's sharing, what a great way for students to get facile, that's a new word for me, facile, in interpreting graphs and by making them. They could be proficient for it for sure. I like the idea of having the productive struggle of which graph do I use, and then for each one of these graphs, what are the settings? And right now, just where I know the settings were what they were supposed to be the first time I did this, and I'm going to go back and look at the video and see, we did have this configuration. Why didn't it come out with the hours on the bottom and the customers up there? Thank you. Facil equals proficient. See, we're learning English with math. I love it. Now, if I change this over to a pie graph, what happens? Immediately, they see that result of what the computer had guessed we might want, which is silly. It's just graphing the hours and showing us what percentage. And we can do a scatter and say, well, does this show us anything? And how does the scatter compare to a bar graph? They are related, but how? So having these questions just at the graph creation screen can lead to some very rich discussion. I'm going to go back to my bar graph here. And I'm going to say, I do want to show the customization here because this is important. You can change the title. This is just a demo. And I can change the color of that. I can change the font of that. So I want that blue. I want that size 12, so it's small. I can change where my legend is. Right now it's on the right-hand side. I want that on the bottom, so it has customers on the bottom. I want to change my background of my whole graph, so it's an ugly yellow on top of blue, so I can get people blinded. I'll do that calmer color. This one is neat. It changes by whether you have pie graphs or bar graphs. Some of the options like stacking, if you had multiple variables or multiple values, it does things really strange. The max one maximizes the graph to fill the screen as best it can, but you lose some of your left-hand values over there. You don't get to see them much. But it's good if you just want to show relative sizes. And if I wanted to reverse it, I can go from 11 down to 12 in terms of which hour are we graphing. And the compare mode's great, again, if we have two values. We're only doing one set of values here. But this is a little tricky. This is a Google trickiness. I have to change one horizontal axis at a time. So under title, my horizontal axis, that's the 6 through 11. Those are the hours. And then I want to put that a different color. I'll put that green just for ha-has now. No, that green's horrible with this. Purple. There we go. And I want to make that a little bigger because I can't see that on the screen. And then I have to go back up here where it says horizontal and go to vertical and set the vertical one. This is number of customers. And again, I can change the color on this. I can change my font size and all that stuff. And that's just the title that's going to show up on the left-hand side of my chart. And I can also set the minimum and maximum for the labels, for the vertical and for the horizontal. So vertical right now, it assumes 0 to 25 because 25 was the highest value. And if I hover over it, you can see how many customers there were each one. So that's just a quirky thing. I wanted to make sure people saw that your horizontal and vertical are independently set, all in the same thing. It's very hard to see that. This is a new feature. This wasn't here last time I looked. The slanted labels. Excel, of course, has had that for a long time. But if I have text in here right now, I just have numbers 6 through 11. But if I had numbers that were longer, or if I had descriptors that were longer, it would automatically slant the labels. I'll hit insert here, and that will make the graph. Now with this graph, if I want to share that in other Google products, like sites, or maybe I want to import it from someplace, there's a bunch of different ways I can do that. But I do want to make sure I publish this chart to make it public. If I publish the chart, it's just the word demo. I want it to be an interactive chart. That means if my data changes, I want my graph to change wherever I put it. In this way, you can put a graph on your website and automatically have the data updated as more data comes into your spreadsheet. Really kind of powerful. If you do it as an image, it's just static. Whatever you capture at that time is what's put up. It doesn't change as the data changes. And you just hit publish. And it says, are you sure you want to publish that? You hit yes. It gives you a link that you can now use to add into places. So let's say you use WordPress for your websites because you don't really want to use Google Sites for some reason. You can copy this text and use that in your WordPress to get that chart to show up in WordPress. Now there might be some formatting issues they have to use. But here in the Google world, if I just go to Sites and I go Insert, there's a place to insert chart. And when I choose Insert Chart, Google's going to automatically see the charts I've created recently and ask me if I want to use this chart or another. It'll list all the charts I've made, which is really cool. Are there any other questions people have about this? I mean, we may have to do another session on spreadsheets, but I wanted to concentrate on the stuff that people typically don't see a lot of in using sheets, because there's a lot of features here. Something we didn't get a chance to cover today that I would want to is the automatic formatting. You know, when students put their responses down, and let's say they had this +5 or -5, maybe I want that to show up color-coded wise so that I can clearly see how many of these are right. So I'm going to just highlight the whole column, and I'll go conditional formatting. And it says format cells if, and I'm going to say text is exactly +5. Now see, I have to get the spaces right and everything on this. So I would have copied this, copied and pasted this before I started typing it. But I'm going to gamble that I can type this in the same way I had it over there. If it's exactly that example, I want it to change so that it's a bright green color so I can see it. And I'll hit done. So now any text in here, so let's say there was some other answers here. Notice how those don't show up as correct, but this one does. And if I copy that one down here, as soon as somebody puts in that right response, it color codes. So you can have data automatically color coding in your spreadsheet, and there's a lot of useful things you can do with this. You can even have the text turn invisible. This makes it so you can turn spreadsheets into your very own fraction bars, which could be really, really powerful. And you saw a little bit of that with my mixing paint. When I look at these bars up here, you know, how do I get the number of cells over here to show up to match this number 8? And that's done with the conditional formatting. This took me a weekend to figure out. So it's not intuitive. It's not something that you will find in a Google Sheet manual someplace. But I just wanted to show you that there's some tools here that you can really use creatively if you get in there and get messy. And I'd love to hear from people on the Links Technology community of practice. How have you discovered that you can use spreadsheets in interesting ways? Of course, you can also leave comments here, and I can post that for you if you're not a member of Links yet. But if you're not a member of Links, maybe David could drop a link to how you can join that. It's a great community for people to discuss a lot of these ideas of what could we be doing in adult education. We have gone over time, so I do appreciate those of you who are still hanging on and finding some value out of this. If you have any questions, by all means, I encourage you to go to the Hanging with Education site, which is at 5squared.us. The second tab, Hanging with Education, is where you can find all our information. And on the right-hand side, there's suggested topics. I probably should create a place on there for questions, just general questions people may have from any of the episodes. Because we do have all of our episodes, the sites and the links are down below. And I'll remind you that I have created a Google playlist with all of the different sessions we've had with Hanging with Education so far. This is weekly, and hopefully next week. Actually, next week is Thanksgiving. So I think in celebrating the idea everybody hopefully is going to get some time to spend with loved ones, I think we're going to skip hanging with education next week, and we'll catch up after Thanksgiving, and we'll have a topic posted here. If you have a topic you'd like, please suggest it, and I look forward to discussing that with you and sharing some options. Until we get back from Thanksgiving, I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. Have a great week.